And we are recording. So, hello and welcome back to Welty at Home, the slow reading virtual book club that alternates works by Eudora Welty with works by authors connected to Welty. Today, we continue our series exploring Anne Patchett's Tom Lake. During this series, we have read and discussed about 40 pages each week. Last week, we enjoyed a brief fall break, and today we return with a discussion of the final 3 chapters. And next week, we will conclude the series with an entire book discussion where we will be joined by author Anne Patchett. If in the meantime, if you have questions for Anne, please drop those in the chat box today or send them to info@eudoraweltyhouse.com, please by Wednesday of this week. So that way Suzanne and I can organize those and facilitate an interesting discussion. I am Anna Traylor. I am the Special Projects Coordinator of Eudora Welty House and Garden, and we are grateful to Suzanne Mars, Eudora Welty's friend and biographer and Professor Emerita of Millsaps College, for guiding these discussions. First, some quick housekeeping. To comment or ask a question, click the reactions button at the bottom of your screen and select raise hand. If you are on a tablet or a phone, you may have to tap the screen for this option to appear, and a lively discussion often takes place in the chat as well. So be sure to glance over at that chat box every now and again. I collect the weekly chat transcripts, and I will share the full transcript at the end of the series. But if you would like a copy before the series is complete, you can send an email to info@eudoraweltyhouse.com. And with that, Suzanne, where shall we begin today's discussion?
Right. Yes, I want to encourage people to send questions. We've only gotten 2, so we'd like to have more than that. Although, if you don't send them, I get to take over, and I've got lots of questions, so I'd be thrilled to be the only questioner. But don't turn it over to me. You'll be sorry that you did. Don't give me power. Over this next session. So I thought at the end of today, we might take a few minutes just to talk about the kinds of questions we want to ask. Okay, so let's start. These are 3 really important chapters. Start with chapter 19, and I thought I might begin with a quotation from the beginning of that chapter to ask you about. So it's on page 267, about 3 pages in. The kids won't leave her alone. The story's over. She's finished it, and they still want more. So tell us about going back to, this is at the bottom of 268, 266. So tell us about going back to New Hampshire, Emily says, cheerful at the thought of additional chapters. Tell us about New York. Tell us about when you met Dad again. No, really, I'm done. They were reminding me of the years when they were small and it was just me in the house beneath all that snow, and Joe was in the barn trying to fix a tractor he didn't know how to fix, and I felt like the children would eat me. Nell was eating me, still at my breast, and the other 2 rushed to crawl in my lap whenever I sat down. I thought Joe will come home and find the 3 of us 3 of them framing out a playhouse with my bones. Okay, so here the mother who's always talking about how much she loves her children is imagining them eating her alive. So should we start there and talk about what that's doing in this chapter? Or if you don't want to talk about that, talk about anything you want to talk about. Anyone? Beverly. Thank you, Beverly.
I think it's interesting that Anne Patchett so easily writes that reference without having children on her own. But those of us who have had children have felt just like that at different times. I mean, that is a very real way to feel that many mothers, I wouldn't say all, but many mothers feel when they've got a passel of young children, they're stuck in the house with them, and they're feeling rather desperate. And so every time I read how Anne Patchett works on these relationships between mother and children, how perfect she is in her description.
So the mother who feels such love for her children, we've seen it all through the
Right.
book, is also going to have those moments of frustration. And here is not an idealized portrait, but a very realistic one. Yeah, Harriet.
Uh,
Harriet? Yeah.
yeah, I'm here. I just took me a minute. Um, in the break, I read Commonwealth, which is a very different take on family than this story. I mean, it's a little surprising in here because in some ways I think the family is so idealized. I mean, I'm thinking this is just going to lead into the portrait of grandmother and their relationship, which maybe we'll talk about. But but it struck me too um, it's stopped me dead. Children as cannibals, and it is but it is a measure of how much she doesn't want to go back to this story, how it's wearing on her, how it is the story of something in her life which has created there a fork in the road, and she's made a choice between them. But she thinks I just didn't want to go back there.
All right. So the power of not wanting to go back evokes this memory of uh, of agony in her yeah, as a young mother. Yeah. Yeah, Joe Ellen. Whoops, we can't hear you, Joe Ellen.
Thanks. I would just like to point out that her attitude, it starts, the orchard is glistening and I am done. Focus on place again. And she says, I have laid out the entire summer at Tom Lake with bonus tracks on either side. I've given my girls the director's cut. She's very conscious of her role. It sounds like a film that she stars in and has been directing and editing. And I think that brings up the issue that we'll probably talk about again later about who manages what. But it really does take some pushing on the girl's part to get her back into it. She says she's done. And I think Nell's the one who pushes hardest. A sentence, start small, see where it takes you.
Yeah, a sentence. Yeah. And where it does take her is where Harry is saying to the grandmother. Should we talk about the grandmother and her memories of her grandmother? Yeah, Beverly.
Well, I mentioned the grandmother early on when she was just kind of a shadow character a little bit. When Laura's still at home and before she's done Tom Lake. But, from this point on, we see how important the grandmother was to her. And we see another one of those family secrets, which is she lost a child.
Yeah.
And Laura doesn't know about that until her grandmother's dying. And she tells her that Brian's sitting at the end of the bed. And then she has to call her mother and say, who's Brian? And so I think it's another example of how many secrets we all, well, maybe not all of us, but I know my family did have secrets that we didn't find out about until much, much later. And, the grandmother's one of my favorite characters in this book because she reminds me of my grandmothers, both of them, and such a dear, loving person who took Laura in when her own mother didn't have the patience or, I don't know, ability to take care of her because she was 35 when Laura was born. And the grandmother takes her in and nurtures her and is like a mother figure to her. But still, she did not know this secret, one more secret.
uh, or um, or something that the grandmother can't holds back
Yeah.
because she's trying to spare others or because it's too painful to recall, but
Mm-hmm.
it's held back. Yeah, I think, yeah, Harriet.
Yeah, I'm thinking about it in terms of stories that we don't tell. And um, when she goes back to her mother says it was too sad. Um, uh, but um, but the idea that it's rare, that we pass on um, all of the stories, and it has something to do with it frames what's happening here between mother and daughters, and the storytelling the story that she didn't quite want to tell, and that she isn't quite telling as she's cherry picking what she tells them. Um, but I'm also thinking about the grandmother as um, going on with her maternal importance to Lara. She says this was probably the origin of my acting. Her reading to her. Um, as she said, maybe be a little bit more interesting, and then maybe be a little less interesting. But this woman has wanted everything, me to have everything I ever thought of wanting. She never made me feel bad about leaving. Um, when I think of what those years added up to, I would rather have spent them with her. Um, and then there's the story of the grandmother's breast cancer, of having that lump that um, she has tragically been afraid to report to a doctor, and the perspective that creates for Lara as she thinks all of the things she thought were important, actress, love, disappointment, disintegrated into nothing. As she faces the death of this woman who has been so important to her. And we're right there in an art town setting, as we are with Brian appearing as a child, having never grown up. We're right there in the cemetery of our town, with characters frozen as they were at the moment of their death.
Yeah, Eudora Welty writes, time is life's one irreducible urgency. And here we have that, everything else is less urgent in the face of the grandmother's, the loss of the child, the threat to her grandmother's life. So, yeah, Joe Ellen.
I think I'd like to push ahead Harriet's observation just a little bit. The grandmother is telling her to be more interesting, less interesting, teaching her performing to some extent. And she was the smartest in the class. Now Lara's the smartest in the class. When I looked at this, Laura's backstory, it sounds almost like the grandmother is stage managing her life, getting her to leave home, which she did not manage. And so that Laura seems malleable to some extent. And this is just the first example of that. When she goes back home, there's more reading and sewing with her grandmother, which there had been before. When she thought she didn't know what to do with her life, and she was reading Moby Dick to her grandmother aloud, who's the only reason she finished it. So there's a whole lot of shaping that goes on here. And when she goes back, she's reading Ripley's novels. The grandmother's closed the Stitchett business, but she's thinking she might open it again until the breast cancer. Then Laura, we hear through the end of that story of New Hampshire, is basically the manager. She manages the family who can visit, and there's the last act in the cemetery, as in our town, and that play is perhaps over.
Oh, I love that idea. Yeah, Bill.
This is the chapter where, when I look back on it, I had a lot of problems with the chronology because,
Yeah, it's scrambled up here.
yeah, and it's really interesting how, the author here really, really used the grandmother's death and the dying period because it's very understandable. Anybody's gone through taking care of somebody like this, and everything else loses importance, and it's like it's a reset of life again. And so this must have happened in 1988 because that's when she was at Tom Lake, and shortly thereafter she goes in fall to New Hampshire after being in California for a bit, and then so it's late in 1988, early in 1989, And she even says all the things I'd thought about myself before. Let me get the page number for you. I believe it's 271. I am an actress. I am not an actress. I was in love. I was betrayed, disintegrated into nothing. So grandmother dies. She goes to New York. And then she says, all those years in New York. It makes it seem like it's this long period of time in New York,
4 years. Yeah.
Yeah, that was it at best. So it's real interesting how she used Ann Patchett uses these kind of things to frame the distance in time when it really wasn't that long.
I think it's also interesting that we're finding out about her family life, and all along I've thought, why isn't there a phone call to the mother? Why isn't there
Yes.
of the siblings? And now we understand that, and I think we also see why her own family, and the relationships have become so central to her, that she's not making the mistake that her own mother made with her.
Yeah. Yeah. And sewing also jumped out at me as kind of a theme that wove the whole story together from the first chapter all the way through the end, because of at every key point, sewing, when she first had sex with that first uh, guy in the play was in the sewing shop, and then sewing when she broke her or tore her Achilles, and then sewing in New York. And I thought it's just an interesting kind of minor theme in it.
Should we talk about the meeting with Joe, which comes in this chapter? And then the one last time she tells them, the one other time she's seen Duke. Of course it's twice, but anyway, she tells the girls about that. But let's talk about Joe here, who comes in after she goes to New York. What about this section stands out to you in the chapter? Melissa, why don't I pick on you? How would that be? I've been missing your voice.
Well, I was just thinking, I think we've been waiting for Joe to come back, and we don't know sort of how it's gonna happen, right? I feel like since the beginning of the book, we've been waiting for them to come to this point. And it almost feels like a staged play. Like he comes into the room, calls her Emily. It's like a kind of again, we're going back to the play. There's so many moments in this book where I feel like that's convenient. And I think that Ann Patchett in this novel does such a good job of balancing the idea of storytelling and how stories are told across families through time, and the idea of like wrapping up loose threads. I think going back to that theme of sewing, we all have loose threads, that are kind of there that we want to have explained to us in our families. But often I'm like, oh, that's convenient. There's Joe. Or just these moments where things like that happen.
Yeah.
But I think that just goes back to the connection to our town, right? I think it's rooted in that play, and so it feels convenient sometimes to me in that way. I'll be done for now.
Don't you think also that the novel does talk about the power of chance? I mean, Ripley's, believe it or not, chance has a big impact on our lives, whether you meet someone at a certain moment or later, the timing of that, and the fact that your life can turn on such moments of chance, so that maybe it's even strategically done. And then I also love that whole idea of the past as a reconstruction, and the daughters are calling these chapters. These are chapters in a novel, or are they? Is it history or is it fiction? And it's both, probably. So yeah, Harriet and then Anna.
I'm thinking about the farm and Joe. I mean, Joe comes in, and there's a line that, Joe's thrown the switch that takes the train from love to the precipitous decline in crop prices, leaving them not with, we're contemplating cherries, not courtship, and then that's good because they need to get this harvest in. And I was just thinking about the farm, and the stress of the farm, the perilous nature of the farm, and the way in which the family organizes to make it work, as something that is, when I'm thinking about the difference between the family in Commonwealth and here, I'm looking for, what is it that makes this family work? And it strikes me that the farm has been this thing that they have worked on together. Um, and that Joe is, every time Joe enters the scene, he brings them back to the farm and to the need of pulling together in this way. So, and this storytelling goes along with the cherry picking here.
What the social psychologist would call superordinate goals. Yes, we've got that. Anna.
Um, I loved Melissa's comment about like this is a very orchestrated meeting, like in a city full of so many people. That Laura even mentions it too. Like she found the one person that she knew. It's like a meet cute if you were in like watching a rom-com, and I think like we've been waiting for their meet cute. We've been seeing her and be so infatuated with Duke that we've been waiting for the time when she finally sees Joe. And I find this, I'm thinking now, this like deep dramatic irony in the fact that Joe refers to her as Emily, which is going to happen again. And it's not cute. It's not cute. So, yeah.
Well, I wanted to talk about that too. So he says Emily, and then he repeats Emily. Is she the same person who was playing Emily, or has she changed at this point, do you think? Because in the very next chapter, when she goes to see Duke, he has left the name Emily Webb at the desk. Yeah. So what about this Joe's reference to her as Emily? Bill?
Well, I think Ann Patchett set this up real well, saying that he was a director that was brought in to fix things. So this had to be like 91, maybe something like that. And he's still helping his aunt and uncle out on the farm by earning extra money. That's what it amounts to. And how else would they have met? There's no other way that they would have met except on a stage. And so the last time he saw her was as Emily.
Mm-hmm.
And so here she's on a stage. It's lit from the front, so it's as if she's part of the play that he's in, and that's how he sees her, just kind of startled, I think. And I thought it was really interesting that she was basting long clumps of tulle to the waistband of a young woman's skirt because the customer wanted a sense of how things would look from the back of the house, And so that just struck me for some reason or another. And the pins in her mouth and putting it into the pin cushion reminded me of my grandmother, because that's what she would do. And I was always horrified to see those pins in her mouth, and she'd take them out and I'd feel a sense of relief. She'd put them back into a pin cushion. That's what happened when I read that particular section. For me, brought me back to being very young.
I think that's right. So here is Joe. The last time I love that. The last time he's seen her is in this setting, and almost, and now again. And but I think for him, then she's beyond, thankfully for him, beyond the person she was back then. She's changed. She's different. Yeah. More self-determining, I think. Yeah. Well,
Yeah, I'm not sure I entirely agree with that. The
yeah.
self-determining. I mean, just something she's wrestled with from the beginning when we hear she was trying to figure out what her life would be. She might be an English teacher, she might join the Peace Corps. And in fact, it's underscored here more than once that she had been found by Joe Nelson. So she was lost. Even she was no longer the girl from Singularity. She declined that identification. But there she was back there with pins in her mouth, a very comfortable situation for her. But she does have a little moxie when Emily sums up later and says, "So Dad saved you." She says, "Well, maybe I saved him too." But excuse me, at that point in New York, she's um, she still seems to be just kind of drifting around, and Joe finds her.
I'm well, I think that's what we feel at that moment. But then after I read the next chapter, well, let's talk about then when we look back on this after having read the next chapter where she does make a very important decision uh, on her own, then I think, well,
Yeah.
so I can be persuaded, Joel, and I'm waiting. So what about let's talk just about Duke's appearance here. I'm letting us go too long, but let's talk about Duke's appearance on the at the farm in 1997. He comes up in a big black car. The girls are Nell is not yet born. Um, Emily and Maisie are there, and they go up. He goes up to the cemetery. So, what about this visit from Duke? Harriet.
Well, there's the comedy of it. What are you doing here? Duke says. Whatever he's come for, it wasn't me. The confusion between them, and she takes him in, and he's different too. She sees his beauty, his confusion. She sees he's wearing a wedding ring. She sees that his beautiful wonky teeth have been ground off and replaced. But you know, she says every sentence she wants to start with, "Do you remember?" And clearly he does not. And that's what I want to ask about because, you know, she said, "What the hell, Duke?" That's what I should have said. And I'm just thinking, what the hell do we think at this point? You know, what is it that's happened with Duke? Is it alcoholism? Is it narcissism? Is it something medical or traumatic? Is it inherited? You know, he says that Sebastian says later on that he doesn't want to pass it on. He hasn't had children. I is it what makes him an artist? Is it that he has a very low sense of or a sense of a kind of uh, weird detachment from reality that is replaced with a kind of commitment to his characters so that he remembers her as Emily, not as, or, you know, that everything he enters, like when he's on Rampart, starts making friends with the criminals in the car as he gets into his part. I just wondering how we're understanding. Um, uh, Duke and I'm, all of these things seem to be possibilities, and I'm wondering what everybody else thinks.
I didn't see it as a medical problem that I thought not wanting to pass on. I thought was a this is from the next chapter, but more of a not wanting to pass on the kind of pathology of psychological pathology of his life, the destructiveness of the of his life. Maybe a realization of that. Beverly.
I think he's just such a narcissist
Yeah.
and he has no real awareness of what impact he's having on other people. When Laura, you know, injured her leg in the tennis game, he didn't take her to the hospital. He didn't come to visit her. It's Sebastian that does that. It's Sebastian that takes her home. You know, she is out of his mind now. You know, she's no more used to him right now. And even when he shows up here, now he's not really there to see her because he didn't know that she lived there. But of course, we know this is sort of foreshadowing for what happens eventually when he comes back for the final time. And I think he's got all of these enablers. You know, Sebastian enables him. Laura enables him when she goes to see him in the facility. You know, he's just charmingly disturbed. I mean, he needs probably drugs and therapy. He's number one in his life, and we see him be destructive so many different times, including we find out to Palace as well. He dumped her too along the way.
I think also he comes back and he doesn't want change. Don't change anything. Don't
Mhm.
change the kitchen. And what, that's another delusion that you're going to go through life without change. And he's trying to hold what he has and not recognizing the power of time, not looking at that. Joellen.
Um, One thing, the first thing I think that Laura says about Duke is that time had left Duke alone.
Mhm.
And all this conversation just now is reminding me that we'll probably swing back to some of the issues talked about last time regarding art and life, or genius or talent versus living in the world. Um, because it's clear that Duke has contributed to the world. His children's movies helped shape Laura's children's lives, etc. Or any consuming passion. And that raises the issue again about Ann Patchett not having children, which Beverly mentioned at the beginning of this show. She's been very forthright about this choice, has been criticized for it. But Jen, she has said absolutely that she didn't have the energy both to write and she wanted the time and freedom for her career and to raise children. And all of this, Duke and Sebastian's willingness, I think, not just to enable, but to help forward the art, what what Duke does so very well, that whether his art is warning people or enlightening them about matters of life. He clearly considers that important. And I thought back about a story I heard years ago about Van Cliburn and his mother. And some of you may never have heard about Van Cliburn, but in the mid 20th century, he was an American phenomenon. He won the Tchaikovsky competition on piano. But the thing I'm remembering about him is that his life was strictly practice and travel, and his mother managed his affairs, and his social life was performing at receptions. And he would not have been able to give that gift of music to the world without that kind of sacrifice in his mother's life. And I may be cranking Duke up a little bit too high here, but I think that's partly what Ann Patchett kind of has in mind and is portraying here.
I have to say that and at the end of the next chapter, I truly hated Duke.
Yeah, yeah.
And I mellowed a little bit at the end of the final chapter, but after that encounter in the mental health facility, anyway, yeah. But yeah, this whole question of art and life, I think, is an important one. Harriet and then Bill.
I think that I understand Duke in two different ways. That is, for Lara, he's been a real disaster. I mean, I think when everybody around her says, you were incredible on the screen. You had a beauty. That she gave something up because he ruined it for her. And I think that from her point of view, we don't forgive him. But I also think about him as separately, in which I'm apparently inclined to think about him as a successful artist who is living with a trauma or something that is, he says, what happened? That's a long one, maybe a whole lifetime, and we just don't know. And we have this sense of Sebastian taking care of him. That what is it that they is there that we don't know? But I'm also thinking about his this whole scene in which he doesn't remember, and I'm thinking about the importance of memory in this book. It's just really emerging for me in these final chapters as something that the book is about. How do we construct memory? Is memory real? I think Emily, when after Lara tells her the story and says, "Should I have told you this when you were 14?" And she she says no. She would have um, thought that her mother was keeping her from Duke, but she also says that she can remember this now because she's heard the story. Is it that she's remembering it, or is it that memory works so that there's a kind of confusion between story, narrative, and memory? And it's not the only scene in these last three chapters. There are many where we're thinking about memory and what we remember and how we remember, and and what explains Duke not remembering. I mean, wasn't 40 years ago. It was maybe 8 years ago when he shows up at the house. And why doesn't he remember? Because she wasn't, nothing was important in that scene except his piece in the cemetery. It's an important topic, I think, in the book.
Yeah, I think that is right because we are not privy to his memories, if whatever they are of that earlier time is crucial. Bill.
Excuse me. I guess the thing that always astonished me, I've met a lot of people like Duke, and of course their charm is kind of lost on me. Doesn't have the same effect that I've seen it. It's like a reaper through a field of wheat. I've seen that kind of person with women, and I just wonder, why do they not see it? Uh, and to be fair, there are women with the same kind of charm and narcissism. It's a horrible disease when they have it. So I didn't have a lot of sympathy for Duke, and how he behaved, but there was something that just didn't match for me with this final encounter that she had, where she got impregnated by him. And then I thought about Ripley. Ripley set that up. He went out of his way to find her so that she could get connected back with Duke again, because we learned later, right after that encounter, that Ripley was in love with her, and he wanted her to mature a little bit, but he wanted that poison of Duke out of her system. One of the old alchemical kind of healing techniques is you give more poison to somebody who's been poisoned. And so here she's poisoned herself again
I'm
with
confused.
Duke.
How does he set up her?
Because he found her for Duke.
No.
Yeah, he did. He found her for Duke because he finds that out from Sebastian.
Mm-hmm.
So
that's how Duke was able to call her. Oh, I missed that. Yeah.
So, and we find out that Ripley still loves her, and so he wanted her to mature some, and so he gets it all set up again. So it was Ripley's manipulating of this whole scene, however believable it is. I mean, everybody has to look into their own life and their own heart to see if that call came, would you go to Boston to help? And it's a perfect match of somebody who's completely codependent, who hasn't figured out who she is yet, matched with this narcissistic, charming person, and that's what happened. So I think it's when she changes character, and that's why he didn't recognize her anymore. Duke didn't recognize her when he came back to the house in '97.
But that's before.
Yeah, he meets her at the house again in '97.
Oh, yeah, that's right. Yeah.
And so, I mean, it's told in a different order, right? So that lodges in our minds as, oh, this is the chronology, but she has this encounter with him, and then in '97 she meets him. So she's changed. He doesn't recognize her at all, even though she was there at that same setting with him. So anyway, that's my thought about that.
Yeah, to give you guys a page number of where this is unveiled to us, it's on page 291, and Duke tells Laura, your uncle is how he found Laura in New York to give her a call and invite her to the institution. And you're correct that institution incident happened, and then Duke later comes to the house sometime later. I found that interesting because this like you said, he doesn't recognize Laura because he puts Emily's name down. She was never Laura to him. He never saw her. He only ever saw her as Emily. She was only ever the person opposite him stage, not a real person. That's just my take, though.
Same here.
Well, let's talk about this chapter where, yeah, I think I had focused on Uncle Bill. Thank goodness you and Anna have pointed out to me that the uncle was Ripley. Ripley is the one who has done this. Yeah. So what about this chapter where Laura goes from New York to Boston? She can't afford it, really. I guess she can afford it. She's got money saved. She goes up there and sees him. Yeah. Beverly.
Well, I read this book when it first came out, and then I listened to Meryl Streep read it. And then we read it in my book club last year. And I had completely blocked the abortion thing between the first times I read it and when we read it for book club. Because I just wanted to get in a fetal position for her. I felt so sorry for her. Not only was she taken in again by Duke, but she had to handle it all on her own. And she did that. And, maybe that's when she grew up. Maybe that's when she, finally drew that line in the sand. But my sympathy for her, as I was reading it, I kept thinking, please no, please no, please no. And of course, that's what happened. But I had blocked it out. So when I came to it again, when I read it the last time or this time, I just blocked it all out because it was painful for me. I know it had to have been painful for her.
Yeah, I was just at a book club and they were doing Tom Lake. This was before we started, and I hadn't reread it. I was going to reread it for our club, and I hadn't reread it then. And I had too. I could not remember the details. Too horrible. So repressed it. Yeah, Harriet.
Yeah, I had exactly the same experience. I did not remember this. And she only gives it a sentence. I mean, it is something, it's a story that she has set up to tell, but the abortion she gives, it's barely there. To go back to Joellen's point, she says, I told him yes because yes was the only word I had for Duke. Yes was the only word I knew. And at some level, I think that we see her, what she does as not exactly a mistake. He called me 2 years after I'd stopped waiting for his call, but he was down and I was there. She does have a relationship with him. He doesn't have a relationship with her, but she has a relationship with him. And she's there for him. And then, of course, there's Mimi
and nobody else in between.
Right, right. Um, and um, and he made me in the bathroom. I looked at him with horror, but he ignored it. An emotion whose expression had to be lost. It has lost its impact in this place. Um, and she falls into a position that she should know better than to put herself in. Um, but her reasons for being there are good ones.
Then when afterwards, she doesn't call Duke and say, I'm pregnant. She doesn't try to get in touch with him. She just tells us that.
Page 301.
Yeah. I didn't have to ask. Oh, yeah. I still had enough money in my savings account left over from when I made actual money. I didn't have to call anyone. I didn't have to ask anyone for permission or help. A nurse stood beside me and held my hand, and I'm here to tell you I felt nothing but grateful. There was always going to be a part of the story I didn't tell Joe or the girls. What I did was mine alone to do. I tore the page from the calendar and threw it away. I didn't tell Joe or the girls. It was mine to do. Joe Ellen.
Yeah, this one she doesn't tell anyone except the reader.
Right.
And if it were the 1980s, a critic named Jim Phelan would have had a lot to say about the ethics of narrative and who knows what. But unlike when she and Joe, or she's telling about Duke's visit in 1997, Joe also knows that, but they've withheld it from the girls because of context.
Mhm.
And here, this is absolutely remaining her own. And I think it has as much to do with humiliation, more to do with humiliation, perhaps. She knows she could only say yes to Duke. But she's also highly aware that he kisses her but misses her mouth by however long. Where's my girl? Is just, where's my birthday girl? Is really insulting.
Mm.
And when he's telling her, then almost immediately he launches into the drill there. Here's the bathroom. Make a mental note of that. And then they get back, and here's the plan. We've got 15 minutes, and do this for me, like the first day at the lake. And then he's facing the mirror during the act. She's aware of all of this. And immediately after that, she leaves, knowing she was the only person he could absolutely count on. And what that means is pretty sad, I think. Um, and then at least she runs into Sebastian on the way out, and we get some context setting her back into her life in New York. But she's still backstage, not knowing what she's doing when then Joe finds her somewhat later. And I find that almost more horrifying than the actual pregnancy and abortion.
When she comes out and Sebastian sees her, he says, Laura.
Yes.
He does not call her Emily. It's Laura. She is Laura to him. And then she makes the decision. I didn't have to ask anyone. I didn't have to call anyone. I didn't have to ask anyone for permission. I've done it. I do. I have that sense that she's reclaimed herself at that moment, but she doesn't tell. And I heard Ann Patchett in an interview, and someone said, "What about the secret?" And she said, "I don't think of it as a secret. I think of it as private, as the ability to keep something private, your own." So, what do y'all think? So, Joellen, you're seeing this as her whole life as a continual retreat. Is that
Well, to some extent, to this point, at least she's very malleable. She's kind of following other people's leads. But I also want to point out that this um, path through memory that we're reading here occurs after she learns of Duke's death.
right?
And it's like she's revisiting this for one last time. And then I think she says that she's done with it. She's torn that page out of her calendar.
Bill?
I was trying to find a page number of something, but I agree. I think it was more private than a secret, and it's just nobody's business. What, when I look at the sequence of events that she's presented us, and by the way, Sebastian called her Laura.
Right.
She doesn't reclaim that name, Laura, until she's telling her kids. So in between, she's Laura to everybody. So and so she says that flame on the candle between them on the table had to go out, and that they could have made an even worse mistake
Right.
if it hadn't, right? So that was the key point. And I think the encounter with Duke had to happen the way it did, or she would have just gone right into Sebastian's arms, and he would have, who knows how he would have treated her, but her life would have certainly been completely different. And that, I think, was the big, she had to get Duke out of her system. And I think she had to be disgusted with herself That's how I would perceive how she felt coming out of that hospital.
You think
What the heck?
Ripley was right then, Bill?
Yeah, I think absolutely. Ripley was right about knowing she had to get him out of her system, and otherwise she would have been with Sebastian coming out of that.
Yeah, Beverly.
I think it's interesting that she named her daughter Emily. I mean, all three daughters are named after somebody. And the fact that she named the first one, the oldest one, the one closest to her relationship with Duke, Emily, to me seems to be that would just be a reminder always because he saw her only as Emily. And maybe it means that she is completely over him. If she could name her daughter that, I don't know, but to me, that would be something that maybe I didn't want right in front of me every day for the rest of my life.
Yeah, that might be a good question to ask Ann Patchett, I think. Yeah, Harriet.
I am thinking about this in terms of stories that we don't tell. Um, and but I'm also thinking about losing Duke, and Emily's the moment when Emily thinks that she wishes Duke could go back to being a famous movie star who I wanted to be my father, and she cries for the loss. Um, that there is both a loss of Duke in terms of the the role he's played in the family, the role he's played in his life, and and she says, tell us what happened when Duke died. She meant both the famous actor and the young man I had known 100 years ago. The two of them died together. I remembered how he would take me gently awake, shake me gently awake at 4 in the morning, his hand moving up my arm in the tangle of sheets. Wake up, he'd say. It's time to smoke. I'm thinking about this as that the story has been um, about Lara's loss of Duke, something we didn't really know until now that he's just died and that it's just a few weeks ago, and that she's telling the story, that she's letting him go in the storytelling, and it's only now I think that she's closing that chapter.
If that she says here when she describes his suicide, said, um, after Joe falls asleep, I stay awake thinking about Capri and the sea and the boat, about Duke and the moon on the water. It's a place I've never seen, and still it comes to me so clearly, the light and the dark and the quiet sea, and how he jumps from the bow, feet first, straight as a knife, and how the hundreds and thousands of tiny bubbles break across his skin, his hair floating up. He lets himself go deep before he starts kicking up toward the surface, and then he swims away from the boat, and from me, and from Sebastian. I think how hard it must have been for him to not turn around, but he kept swimming for as long as he could go. I let him go. Not that he was ever mine, but still, I let him go. Uh, yeah, at this point, at least, maybe only at this point, and I think that's probably what Harriet and Joellen are saying. It's only at this point that she is free from him. And that Beverly would say, yeah, naming the daughter Emily is a mark of that, no matter what she said before, maybe. Is that what you're saying,
Mhm.
Beverly?
Yes.
I find personally like it's almost there's like a simultaneous reclaiming of Emily whenever it's like, she lets a um a little bit of her as Emily go in letting Duke go, but then when Joe comes back and he calls her Emily, she's like able to recall those good moments about being Emily, the positivity.
Mhm.
Whenever earlier in the book we think back to a time in which somebody is asking her about, you'll have to refresh my memory, but somebody is asking her about naming her daughter Emily, and then we think about the fact that Emily dies in the 3rd act, and like we had to reflect on like, why would you name your daughter a character that you played who you know dies? She almost reclaims that happy part of this character, I think, in these final moments.
Joe Ellen and then Harriet.
Yeah, I think that Emily is Laura was Emily before Duke. And that's become such an identification. Remember, even when she was in California making the film, she said, I mean, this was her impression of herself, at least. Other people would not agree that she could do Emily and parts like Emily well. And that was like who she was, which is really interesting when you think about later. And the management of the farm, it's highly gendered. Joe runs the farm, she runs the house, and there's a kind of rooting in traditional roles in society there. But as far as Duke is concerned, they're not really done with Duke. We have chapter 21 yet, where we learn, in fact, how deeply rooted Duke has been in their lives. And I mean, I think one of the daughters says earlier, we wouldn't know any of this if we hadn't asked about Duke. And so that's the kind of effect and influence that we're talking about. Sebastian is the one who tells them that Duke bailed out Ken and Maisie, that Duke is the reason they are on this farm at all, that it was less for them to do. Joe's intention was never to buy the farm initially, but then he was able to when it occurred to him later. And so Duke has just saturated their lives in some way or another, both for positive and good effects, I think. It's a wild story.
And also, I think that Duke's coming back to the cemetery at the end. We have to think about our town,
Mhm.
that cemetery scene, and Emily's attempt to go back in the past, and what a failure that was, and then Duke's attempt to hold the past. But now, I mean, she says she lets him go, and I think we have that sense that too, that he's in the cemetery, and he has swum away from it, and maybe he's recognizing what the stage manager has to say. I don't know. Maybe he has. Harriet and then Bill.
I was going to say that I think it's something similar to what Joellen is saying about the name Emily. You know, that Emily is Laura, a part of Laura, and it's a creative part of her that she has. It has been her path in that life is ruined by Duke, but on the other hand, it's still her. That is, when she's recognized as Emily, I don't think it's always bad. It's a tribute to the way she played that part, and so when Joe says it, you know, it's something different than when Duke apparently can't remember her name, although he's called her. And then we're talking about her letting him go, but it's also true that he's not gone.
He's there. Yeah.
He'll be with them forever. If he can't live there, he could be dead there, and he's dead there. And he is. He is, Joe will tell Sebastian, um, uh, where would he be in the world except with his brother, here with us? Um, uh,
I think this is a moment of forgiveness.
I,
You
I,
of letting go of the past because you forgive what's happened in the past, and sort of.
I'm thinking now about the Optimist daughter and letting the rolling pin go. That there's she's let Duke go, and she can also live with him in the cemetery forever with them all.
Right. His power over her has gone.
Mhm.
Bill.
Yeah, I think overall the everybody in this story was benign for her, you know, at worst. And especially Duke. But I was really touched when Joe says the lines that the stage manager says. I thought that was a great way to end. And the stage manager was one of the first people we heard talking all those variations of stage manager in the very first chapter. So, on the very first pages of that first chapter. So just a wonderful way to tie the whole story together.
Joe Ellen.
I was going to say a similar thing, that the circle of life, all that stuff, we're circled back to the beginning of the novel, definitely, where back to where the auditions were when Laura first heard those stories, or the lines. But also it says, the daisies held on all summer, becoming a wild tangle over the graves, bringing in that natural element that's been so important throughout also. And I think without having gone through this narrative right when she has with her daughters, has been a cleansing thing for Lara. I think that it's had that effect on her too, ending with the death of Duke and letting go. What else?
A real catharsis. Yeah. All right, we're out of time.
We sure are.
But I hope you'll really think about questions so we can have a good discussion with Anne. I'd like for you all to be asking the questions. So please send us questions, and they could do with, narrative technique. They can have something to do with our town or with the cherry orchard, with the key political issues that might be raised here, despite the predominantly private address of the story, whatever you want. And please send those questions, and we'll try to script them and call on you to ask them when we have Anne with us. Anna?
That's going to be also a reminder that we would love to have those questions into us by Wednesday, so that way we can organize those questions and make sure that you know that you will be called upon. I will send you an email to let you know. So you can send those to info@eudoraweltyhouse.com, and we will really appreciate it. Thank you guys so much, and we'll see you next week.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.